Hello aviation fans, Sky here, and we continue our walk through the valley of business aviation. After the turboprop planes, we finally get to the full-fledged business jets, and our today's hero is in fact one of the fathers of this breed. G-1159 Gulfstream II is a jet-powered heir of the old Gulfstream I, developed by Grumman in the 1960s, produced by it, then Grumman American, and then finally Gulfstream American. It's actually a real soap opera. Let's check it out. The first offspring of the Grumman company, the Gulfstream I turboprop aircraft, was awesome. It had a fairly decent range and could work with a wide scale of airfields, unlike the business jets that had a problem with destinations. The network of high-quality airfields was underdeveloped, and the jets were very demanding of them. And of course, the main advantage of the Gulfstream was its cabin. Large, wide, roomy. A real luxury in comparison to the cramped cabins of small jets, inside which it wasn't even possible to stand up straight. But this miracle had its drawbacks, coming mostly from the main source of its merits, the turboprop power plant. Yes, the cabin was spacious and comfortable, but those propellers near the fuselage were so damn noisy it was annoying. After all, it was a VIP class aircraft. And the speed of 350 miles per hour or 560 kilometers per hour is quite modest. Sure, the engines are economical, but time is money too. The reliability of turboprops is high, but well, it was the 1960s. The roaring barrels were also not bad at all. Airplanes such as the Lockheed Jetstar, Dassault Falcon 20 or Hawker HS-125 were inferior to the Gulfstream in terms of capacity and range, but they did set a certain trend that could not be ignored. Besides, the Grumman management still had a long-standing dream, a small corporate plane flying across the Atlantic. The result of all this thinking was a simple conclusion. They had to make a jet plane which, with all its advantages, still preserves the merits of the Gulfstream I. This task was not as simple as it seems. Some of the indicators almost contradicted the others. The main problem was, of course, the power plant. However, demanding customers had their own truth. The jet engines had already matured. The program, named G-1159, didn't seem too complicated after the birth of Rolls-Royce Spey. These brand new turbofan engines were considered an apogee of technological development in the industry, were quite economical, reliable and powerful. With time, they found their place in the nacelles of many civilian vehicles, such as the BAC-111 and Fokker F-28. And its special versions were applied on various military aircraft, like the British version of the F-4 Phantom II. Plus, for example, the ZNWS-9 engine from the multi-purpose JH-7 is in fact a copy of Spey. In regard of the Grumman project, this engine, in addition to other advantages, had a thrust of about 50 kilonewtons, which was enough for their promising and rather big business jet. It was a chance they decided to take. In May 1965, the company announced the Gulfstream II project. And then the adventure continued. Let's say we have the engines, but the problems don't end there. It was necessary to preserve the fuselage dimensions and capacity close to the Gulfstream I, while accelerating it to the speed of Mach 0.85. In addition, one of the advantages of the first aircraft was the ability to fly from many and not very good airports, which means that the new aircraft, significantly increasing the maximum speed, still had to have a small takeoff and landing speeds. According to the general design, the engineers decided not to make a revolution. The aircraft received a pair of engines in the rear of the fuselage, a T-shaped tail, and a swept low wing. Give or take, a classic business jet. However, the requirement of low landing speed influenced its aerodynamic profile. First of all, the wing. It is huge, has an area of about 75 square meters, and its sweep is slightly reduced in comparison with analogs. But it was not enough. To achieve the desired parameters, they also had to decently modify the mechanization. Most of the elements received a classic design, but to increase lift in low speeds, the plane received large Fowler's flaps. This is one of the flaps versions not new for that time, but having a plus in our conditions. When released, they come out of the wing, creating an increased lift not only due to the curvature of the profile, but also due to an increase of the already large area of the wing. This decision, and a number of other small ones, gave rather low takeoff and landing speeds to the aircraft that was not lightweight. Its maximum takeoff weight almost reached 30 tons, or over 65,000 pounds. In many ways, this was achieved due to Grumman's great experience in the struggle for takeoffs and landings in difficult conditions. Just a reminder, these guys were the largest suppliers of naval aviation, and they were good at it. An aircraft carrier is a difficult place to fly. Moreover, some solutions of the wing of the Gulfstream II came from the wing of the A6 Intruder naval attack aircraft. At first glance, a completely different machine. Another challenge was the drawback of the planes of this design, that became a serious problem at that time. With this arrangement of elements, at high angles of attack, situations arise where the engines and the tail unit can fall into the wing's aerodynamic shadow. The plane can drastically lose its thrust and control, which means a deep stall, and this is very, very bad. In the 1960s, many aircraft manufacturers encountered this problem, and it even became a cause of several plane crashes. Given the size of the wing of the Gulfstream II, the designers of Grumman had every reason to be worried. In order to solve this problem, the engines were raised and pushed a little forward, and the T-shaped tail received a fairly large stabilizer. This allowed to minimize the risk of stall. As means of reassurance, in case the crew accidentally starts to drive the plane into dangerous modes, the cabin was equipped with a warning system and vibration signals on the yokes. The task was completed. There were no accidents caused by stalls for the entire period of operations. The result of the engineers' work was shown already in 1966. On October the 2nd, the G-1159 prototype, assembled at a familiar site in Bethpage, New York, made its maiden flight. 4 planes took part in the certification program, and they received their documents a year later, in October 1967. Moreover, the Gulfstream II received a fairly extended certificate, allowing it to act as an ordinary commercial airliner. But with a capacity of up to 19 passengers, it of course would have been a very uneconomical airliner. Perhaps Grumman was thinking of making a commercial modification later. Spoiler alert, they didn't. The Gulfstream production scheme remained the same. Grumman was assembling green airplanes with engines and avionics, while customization, painting, and cabin installation were being performed by subcontractors according to the customer's requirements. However, this scheme was changed at the first step of this ladder. The fact is that in the late 1960s, the Apollo lunar program was at its peak, and Grumman, as one of the most important participants, was engaged in the development and assembly of the lunar landers. In addition, the company extended its military aircraft line and was preparing to begin production of the F-14 fighters. All of it required production capacity, and the site in New York was overloaded. It was decided to take the civilian business to another place. In the city of Savannah, Georgia, a new factory was built, to which the mass production of business jets was transferred. The first aircraft left the factory at the end of 1967, and the Bethpage site supplied a total of 40 planes before closing their production. The Gulfstream II business jets were very successful. They accommodated up to 19 passengers, and in the VIP layout for 10 people were super comfortable, surpassing all competitors. The maximum airspeed reached 581 miles per hour, or 936 kilometers per hour. The large size of the wing justified itself. Despite the considerable dimensions and weight, the plane was quite undemanding of the airfields, and the large lifting force of the wing had made it into a high flyer. The Gulfstream II's ceiling reached 45,000 feet, or 13.7 kilometers. Quite a lot. Another advantage was the fuel capacity. Coupled with excellent engines, it allowed to fulfill the dream of Grumman. With a range of up to 4,100 miles, the aircraft became the first business jet capable of flying from the USA to Europe. The Gulfstream was now flying over the Gulf Stream. During the production process, the aircraft was constantly being upgraded. It received a version with fuel tanks installed at the wingtips, as well as the number of improvements of the power plant, which reduced the noise level. In the 1970s, this issue became serious and was resolved by introducing regulatory restrictions. A military version was also created, the VC-11A transport. But the epic supplies didn't happen. The military were not eager to purchase the plane, unlike the private customers that appreciated the aircraft. In the 70s, the corporate adventures continued. In 1973, after reorganization, Grumman merged with American Aviation Corporation and singled out its civilian aviation business into a subsidiary, Grumman American Aviation. And 5 years later, in 1978, they sold most of it to American Jet Industries, headed by Alan Paulson, the businessman who eventually formed the Gulfstream American Company. By that time, the history of dominance of the first Gulfstream jet was coming to an end. The requirements for such aircraft were getting higher, and the answer was in development of its successor, the Gulfstream III business jet. The old plane, continuing to be operated for a long time, was modernized, receiving a number of innovations of the new one, such as elements of onboard systems and winglets. Production lasted from 1967 to 1980. In total, 258 Gulfstream II aircraft were assembled, which were actively used in the private and state structures of the United States, as well as in a number of countries of Africa and South America. One of the operators was NASA, and their aircraft were the most curious. They were converted into flight trainers in order to simulate the atmospheric flights of space shuttles. To get closer to the performance of the shuttles, the business jets underwent modifications, the brightest of which was the specific cockpit. The right side, classic Gulfstream, and the left, a complete rework, similar to the spacecraft cockpit. The first planes were delivered over to the agency in the mid-1970s, even before the start of the shuttle flights, and the crews were being trained on them, in fact, until the very end of the Space Shuttle program in 2011. The Gulfstream II airplanes continued to be used for a long time, and are still flying, although the stricter requirements of regulators severely limit their capabilities. The noise limitation is especially weighing it down. In the 21st century, the SPAE engines no longer have the title of the most advanced. This title now belongs to other leaders, the stories of which will be told in the following episodes. In the meantime, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Fast flights and soft landings to you.